John. I'm the one who has the Australian accent and grew up in Australia. So,
All right.
yeah, thank you very much for joining today's assignment drop-in clinic. For those who don't know me, my name's Stephen McCormack. I'm one of the board members of the IIM. I started in December, and I'm focusing on events as one of the board members. So I'm very honoured actually to be able to host our event today together with our IIM partner organisation, Morphosis Partners, who've kindly offered to lead today's assignment drop-in clinic. There's quite a few of us on the call, and I think there'll be a few more joining. So the way I propose we run this meeting is as follows. I'll hand over to Joe Rawcliffe and Simon Hudson from Morphosis in a minute, and they're going to take us through a presentation that contains essentially their latest intelligence on the UK employment market. They're going to run through the presentation. I've seen it, it's very interesting. There'll be about 20 to 25 minutes, I think they'll need to do that. After that, I'd like to then open up a Q&A session. And because there's quite a few of us, I think what would be good is if you could raise your hand. There's a little button for raising your hand on the Zoom window that you've got. Or you could also type your question in the chat. And then what I'll do is I'll just call you up because we may get a few questions. I'll just call you up to ask you a question. And Joe and Simon really value conversations. So it would be good for you to, perhaps to then just ask your question using your mic rather than me rephrasing your question, if you like. Yeah, and if you wouldn't mind, because there's so many of us, if you could just keep your mics on mute so we don't get any, background noises. Like in my case, sometimes I hear the ice cream van going by. So I'll keep my mic on mute as well. Okay, so without any further ado, I'd like to hand over to Joe Rawcliffe and Simon Hudson from Morphosis Partners. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. That's a nice intro. And here I am. I'm Joe Rawcliffe. I'm co-founder with Simon Hudson of Morphosis Partners. We are a collective of experienced in-market practitioners, and our focus is on championing interim practitioners, helping them succeed primarily in the job markets as directly sourced talent, which we'll be going into in more detail across the questions and answers and the presentation itself. What do we do best? Well, we're specialists across all working sectors at bringing the right talent or the right interim practitioner in front of the right organisation for the right thing at the right time, and we do it pretty fast. So today we're here for you. We're here to answer any questions, any queries, any concerns, any experiences you've had from your searches for assignments, either current or past. And the information we're going to provide and the answers we're going to give from the front line. They're our experiences in working for interim practitioners, both in the UK and globally. And in fact, the presentation we're going to give is just to give you a little bit of a context around the job market that you are in, or the assignment market that you're in, because we haven't met many people who understand it before they go into it. So the idea is that we're not going to perhaps take 20 to 25 minutes. We'll try and close it off as quickly as possible to give you more advantage and more time to put your questions forward, which we may or may not inadvertently answer through the presentation. But the idea is that today is about you, and the information we give and provide is meant to be for your advantage. So Simon, if we could have the next slide, let's dive into the job market. So here we have it, what it looks like, the dynamics, content and context of it. There are currently 22 working sectors in the UK and every other country where you can have a place of work. There are 180 sub-supporting sectors or ecosystems pertinent in the UK. There are, in fact, 198 countries where English-speaking individuals can work, and we should know we've worked into 31 of them from the UK. Let's just consider very quickly how one will look for an interim assignment. What will you do? Well, you'll use LinkedIn. You will use your network. You will, when I say use your network, you will offer the fact that you are looking for work and try to reignite often dormant connections or connectivity. And And you will also seek to ignite or connect with or get known by ISPs, particular to your sectors of interest. So let's just consider those three routes to market. Let's look at LinkedIn. Currently, there are over 1 billion profiles on LinkedIn, of which 42.9 million are actually registered in the UK. Now, of those 42.9 million, 170,000 professionals carry the term interim on their profile. So that's the first thing. Let's look at the recruitment market, or the ISP market. Currently in the UK, there are over 30,000 recruitment firms, which house collectively over 201,154 recruiters. Now, of the 30,000 firms, 139 offer interim as professionals for work in organisations. Of the 139, circa 50% are only exclusive to the interim practitioner. When you also look at the recruitment market, you see how it has become, let's just say, compromised by technical processes, companies preferring directly sourced talent, and the fact that AI as well has caused a 30% reduction in hiring or placement fees for recruiters throughout the UK. So what does that generally mean? Well, it means that candidates are secondary to new clients for ISPs, because if you look at the collective of ISPs, let's say 139 as there are, and let's look at the number of interim professionals, 170,000. And if you divide that and just do a very casual sum, you will gather that consistently across 139 firms, 170,000 profiles, there are in fact 850 interims per ISP, assuming that there are 200 ISPs per organisation, or in fact 1,223 interim providers per ISP organisation. And bearing in mind that most interim providers are actually with more than one ISP, those numbers will be a lot higher. So when you look at this market, and you also look at the fact that currently, as far as we know from our activities, there are about to be 1.6 million more professionals launched into the job market or displaced into the job market for various reasons, who again will become, add to the numbers, either the 170,000 or, the current number of people registered in the UK as 42.9 million unemployed, as they will be. So when you look at this market, did it meet your expectations? Because if you're looking at LinkedIn, understand, or clearer on what that looks like. If you look at networks tend to be backward facing. And what do I mean by that? Well, an individual's network, from our experience, with all due respect, tends to be backward facing. It's where you have come from, not necessarily where you wish to go next. And back in the days, as I always say, because I am from Lancashire, as you heard me say prior, back in the day, we used to have a saying around networks: it's not what you know, it's who you know. Well, actually, in today's highly connected environment in which we live in a global transient workforce environment. A network of value is not about people you know now, necessarily. It's more about people who need to know you now. So what can we gather from this view, from this overview that, basically it's very advantageous to know about? Simon, can we have the next slide, please? Well, what does it tell us? It tells us that the landscape for assignments has changed. There's been key shifts in the interim landscape, as there has in full-time, permanent, portfolio, fractional. The shift has been consistent across all areas of employability, particularly at senior level. There's more competition than there's ever been before, because we're all now highly connected. The recruitment fragmentation means that many ISPs have exited the ISP world and are now being taken in-house, along with headhunters and recruiters of esteem, to be part of in-house talent attraction teams. So that's another consideration when you're looking at how ISPs behave, or how the recruitment market is behaving, and the time that they have. And you could almost say that the candidate or the practitioner's relationship with recruitment is broken, because ISPs and recruiters generally have got very little time for the glut of candidates they've got access to. So I think that the data that we provided will will support that to some extent. There's reduced engagement, as I said, recruiters have less time. Tech-led hiring, companies favouring directly sourced talent and automation. What does that mean? Why would they prefer directly sourced talent? Well, I would put a question to the audience here today. Would you pay 30% over market price for something you didn't have to pay 30% over market price for? So that's something definitely to consider. ISPs now are used more as benchmarks rather than an organisation to buy talent from. Again, leading back to and from tech-driven processes and AI, automation. We've got limited control on searches, really, as an individual, when you consider that a lot of individuals, whether you are interim or other, will have a high dependency on the recruitment market and a high dependency on backward-facing networks, which could mean, in many cases, that your placement strategy is at risk. And I think overall, from what I've just presented and from what you've hopefully taken on board, the market's tough. And it's becoming more and more tough as time evolves, because the market is evolving in line with how companies are looking to hire. So if you are misaligned, i.e., you've not got the right routes to market, or you're finding the market tough, it's generally telling you that you are either being inconsistent or you are misaligned to how the market works generally. And that's just a general view. It's not taken in any way, shape or form to be directed at anyone present today. So with this data in mind, I'm going to more considerations to take into play. So I'm now going to hand you over to Simon, who'll take you through further information.
Hello, everybody. I'm Simon. I'm, as Joe politely calls me, I'm the other brain in the jar. Not a great image, but that's how she refers to me. And what we ought to be thinking about with what Joe has shared is simply the fact that, you know, when you've got the Mr. Trump and you've got other things going on globally, it just makes things more volatile, uncertain. And at face value, interim should be in such demand right now for organisations, particularly when organisations are struggling to look beyond the lens of their own nose in terms of future forecasting. And so that short-termism requirement should really be playing to, you know, specialised interim practitioners who are clearly proven to be able to go in, land, deliver a value, and then exit. And for some people, that's certainly the case, you know, but for others, there's a growing sense of unease in the marketplace. And as Joe talked about, you know, the idea that it's not really about the interim practitioner and their skill set. It's more about the extent to which that skill set is visible to the right audiences in the right channels. And, you know, certainly if I think about one client that was supported this week, you know, I had 3 ISP calls, 2 of the 3 roles have already been ghosted from the ISP access. And it's not to denigrate about the ISPs, it's simply a case of recognising that ISPs are merely one of a number of routes to market. And so those who tend to be on balance more successful more of the time tend to have, whether by fluke or proactive action, they tend to have alignment with the right ISPs who at the right time have the right opportunity, along with the right people in their existing and indeed future networks. So hopefully that came across really just to sort of demonstrate that it's not as easy as here's my CV, people will call me, a week later I'm on assignment. Great if it happens, but it doesn't happen as often as that, as easily as that in the current climate. But we're just going to take one aspect of what does this mean for you as the interim practitioner. And what we're sharing here is effectively a survey based on 2 things. One is the employer attitude to progressive gaps in between assignments, and also the ISP or the headhunter attitude over time for interim practitioners who have progressive gaps in between assignments. So one of the great attractions or appeals that that a lot of interims venture into the world of interim for, is this notion or idea that they can have a greater control on their time, i.e., I'm going to become an interim to do 6 months on assignment. I'm going to have these specific 3 months off. And then within a week, I'll be back on assignment for another 3 to 6 months. And so the cycle repeats. For a very minority, that works. And it's great when it does. But the harsh reality is that you nor I are in control of when a particular company has a critical problem that plays to require your expertise. And so just to sort of give you a sense of this chart here, what we've sort of got on the y-axis is this sentiment of desirability, the perception of your brand, the perception of your day rate, the perception of, are you a winner? Can you hit the ground? Can you deliver? All of those, what I would call subconscious biases. On the x-axis, you've got time gap. And what you will see then is that essentially the headhunter perception actually remains a little bit more positive than the employer perception over time. The employer's perception is usually waning more quickly, and therefore you could argue the value of the headhunter ISP partner is that they can effectively go on a phone call with a company and say, I know this interim's not been on assignment for 5 months now or 6 months now, but he's really good. And, you know, he can definitely hit the ground, or she can hit the ground running, give you what you need, and therefore your business can move forward in the appropriate desired way. But it's interesting about mindset and behavior. And I guess the first thing I'd like you to think about is, if you remove yourself from your own position of either having a gap of 0 time or 2 months or 6 months or whatever it may be, is put yourself in the seat of the buyer. And the first buyer, if it's an ISP channel, is of course that ISP. They have to look at you in consideration of other talents that are available to them. And if you've got a couple of interim professionals who appear to have literally just come off one assignment, are energized, well, maybe they're fatigued actually if they've worked really hard on assignment, but assuming that they've recharged, and then compare that to, let's say, an interim professional who has had 6 to 9 months off. You know, how does that ISP respond to the energy, the instinct around that, comparing the two practitioners? And similarly, think about how they've then got to behave in front of their client, you know, to say, look, you've got 3 interims here, you've got somebody who's really good, they've just come off assignment, they're ready to go again. So you can imagine the narrative versus, I've got another person here, yeah, that they've not had traction for the last 9 to 12 months, but I really rate them. I think you should give them a chance. And I think for you, they'd be really good. You can see the narrative is different. More importantly, it also has a downward impact on the perception of day rate value, not just utilization rate, but the perception of the first person isolated would probably be, wow, I hope we can afford them. 1,200 a day this person wants, fantastic, they sound great. The other person, well, he's been off assignment for a while, a bit more risk, not quite sure. Okay, do you think he could take, or she could take 800 a day? So all of these things are intrinsically biased, but it's worth highlighting to you that, you know, the job market is quite unforgiving. And even if you've deliberately been in control of the gap, all I would say to you is that when you're facing a job market that is becoming arguably more unforgiving, you know, gap between assignment becomes a greater challenge as time progresses, as the graph sort of indicates. But just to give you a greater enhanced view, let's think more about the ISP perspective around gap. And these are just some of the observations. And this is more about the ISP's approach to positioning that individual to a client that they're supporting, you know, with a real opportunity. If that gap is relatively short, you know, it's like, well, that's normal. That they've come off an assignment, they've started the search again, they're now available, brilliant. Nice, easy, straightforward. But you can see how the notion, the perception upon that profile of that person starts to wane over time. And that's because an ISP, if we think about it, has to present themselves to a client as being almost the access channel for somebody that is highly regarded, highly respected, great track record, proven, and therefore therein lies the comfort. And you can see in this, it's a lot easier for that ISP to present somebody who's got a shorter, off assignment gap than somebody who, for whatever reason, has an extending or extended gap. From an employer point of view or the end company, again, it's relatively similar, but you can see how the whole positioning, it's a lot easier both for you if you're going direct or if you're going via the ISP. It's a lot easier if there's less challenge, there's less disconnect to try and convey over to an intended audience. So I think it's quite interesting. And I think the other observation when it comes to things like LinkedIn is that ISPs historically would have a profile of a talent, whether it's an interim procurement director or interim CFO, and their first presentation of that individual to the end client would be, almost, I'm hearing this for the first time. The challenge that ISPs have, not just ISPs, but the hiring landscape in general has, is that, LinkedIn, for example, if you sat on LinkedIn as an example, things like your employment gaps, things like your behavior in terms of how you use LinkedIn and things like that are now not just there for the ISP to observe, but they're also there for the end employer to observe. And so again, what it also means is that if you're looking at a gap, it's imperative to make sure that that gap, if it is deliberate, if it is being controlled by you, that you make sure that that gap looks like it is one that you are in control of, as opposed to the reason I've been off assignment for 9 months is simply because I've been misaligned to the way that the job market for assignment acquisition sort of plays out these days. So again, make sure that your narrative for a gap is one that is easy to understand, by yourself, easy to translate to the ISP, and thereafter easy to translate to the end employer. So we're giving you these perspectives simply just to encourage your thinking about the reality of the environment within which you operate. It's competitive, it's fragmented, and it can be very unforgiving for those that find themselves out of position. So it's important, as I've sort of highlighted here, that you've really got to sit yourself in an environment where, if that gap is not resolving and it's not being controlled by you, how are you changing your behaviors in order to resolve that? Because interestingly enough, particularly with things like LinkedIn and a swell of talent, it's more difficult now for an employer who perceives there is choice, or an ISP who has choice of talent. It becomes more difficult for them to be able to say, this is the interim who can come in, deliver impact quickly within 3 months, and then can leave your business in a better shape. Because they may turn around and say, well, but he's been off assignment for 12 months, or she's been off for 6 months. What have they done to try and resolve that gap, that notion? So it's imperative to recognize not just your expertise, but the perception of your brand. And both of them work hand in hand. They work together. Over to you, Joe.
Thank you. So the information we have given today, again, is from the front line. It's from 11 years of experience to current date. And it's what we find. And literally, from that experience, we found every individual that we have worked with in the interim market and other presents to us with 5 critical derailers around their searches, which relate to how the job market works, the dynamics and the content and context of it. And I'm quite sure that if you look at this ring here, it lists recruitment, ISPs, agencies, networking, LinkedIn, going direct to employers, and interview biases, in other words, selling yourself when you get the opportunity to sell yourself. So in our experience, all 5 of those particular arenas have been either not functioning correctly or completely stopping a search from being effective and productive. So Simon and I are quite sure that, or we're quite confident that the questions you will ask today are going to fall into one of those 5 categories. So from the information we've imparted, again, from the front line and from our own experience, we're now ready. We're here for you. We're here to answer your questions. So let's dive in and, let's get these questions answered as best and as generally as we possibly can. Okay, over to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Joe and Simon. That was very interesting. I might be selfish and get the ball rolling with a question. Seeing as you were talking about interims with gaps in between assignments, what practical strategies do you recommend that interims that have longer gaps could deploy to quickly rebuild their perceived market relevance?
Is that one for you, Joe, or?
Well, I'll chip in and you can chip in as well, perhaps. I mean, for me, it really is all about, longer gaps. It's all about sustainability. And from my experience or our experience, when we're talking about networks, that tends to be, and I'm talking outside of the ISP arena now, it tends to be a more prominent route for individuals. And one of the reasons gaps exist is either from personal choice or because, as Simon and I have highlighted, the market is fragmented and quite complex. So a key point for me, or a key tip from me around realigning and uplifting your brand and perhaps refreshing your approach, would be to audit your network itself. And what do I mean by that? I mean, well, we all have high levels of connectivity, and let's just take LinkedIn as one avenue. We all have networks. We all presume we know our networks, and we all attempt to dive into those networks as and when we require them. And one of the key functions of a network is to assist, if possible, hopefully, from receptivity and benefit, for each other. However, we do tend to forget our networks, do we not? Because we tend to pick them up and drop them as and when we need them. When we're on assignment, we think very little about our networks because we're busy. When we're off assignment or coming off assignment, we then start to think about our network. And there's no other area of a relationship type environment between 2 humans where you can pick people up and drop them as and when it suits. So my tip would be audit your network. Get back to understanding who's in your network, where they're positioned, and how likely are they to help you. In other words, provide advocacy for you. When you can export your data from LinkedIn, it's very simple to do. If you want, after the presentation, if you want me to send you the way to do it or talk to me about doing it, then I'd be very happy to provide you with that information. An audit of your network will give you a clear understanding of your brand proposition in market currently, because it's your ecosystem. And I would remind everyone, if you're not already aware of it, and I cannot remember for the life of me who said it, but I think it's really apt, when you've been off assignment for a while and you're feeling frustrated, if it's not from choice, your network really is your net worth. And it's the first port of call to revisit with regards to who have I got, who do I know, and who could offer me advocacy, as example. So that would be my major tip, but not to get downhearted, because gaps can be recovered. But that is a major component for me when we work with clients, is let's audit that network, let's have a look. And in that respect, you're then talking about future-facing networks, which we'll probably cover for another question. Simon, you got any tips?
Yeah, I mean, just picking up on the existing network, I think the other thing that we see a lot with the individuals that we support is just the tone and style and form of the way that they typically engage with their network or have done. And the first thing that I will say is, if you've not communicated with elements of your network for some time, please, please, please don't make that first message, "Hello, Bob. I'm now looking for a new assignment opportunity. If you know of anything going, can you please let me know? Oh, by the way, hope all is well." because the advice I would probably say is imagine yourself in their seat and think about what you would be receptive to, because your own interpretation of that, you're probably not going to be far wrong on. And that doesn't mean existing network as in people in end businesses. It also means people in the ISP networks that you have, because from their point of view, they're busy, they provide a valuable service to you if they have the right opportunity to hand for you. But it doesn't really land that well if they only ever hear from you when it's, here's my CV, gives a job, or that type of sentiment. So just bear in mind that a little bit of relationship management goes a long way when it comes to that existing network. So think about your narrative, think about the message, and if it is that you are in part guilty of some of that, then just reframe that to something that sort of lands better, lands more softly. The other thing I would say, just because it was quite a broad question, is that it's also probably worth your while in just thinking about, as time progresses, when you come off assignment, one of the other things that we see quite a lot is the notion from that interim professional to sort of say, I'm going to widen my field of view. And the driver for that is fear of missing out, quite simply. That they will sort of say, well, if there's no demand for interim program director, maybe I'll be open for interim transformation director, maybe I'll be open for this, maybe I'll be open for that. The challenge you have with that is interims are known for being precise, offering clarity, that true leadership persona, and being a sort of, I can do that, I can do that. Yes, I would agree that in the main part, your skills probably are applicable and more broadly transferable. But when you find yourself in a tight job market, or when you find yourself, whether it's through your own deliberate action of taking time off or not, the assignment acquisition market is very, very unforgiving for people who present with a lacking of clarity and a lacking of focus around their proposition. So the second thing I would ask you to do or advise is to just, the easiest assignment for you to procure is an assignment that reflects you at your absolute best. So really hone in on what is your niche expertise. So don't just be an interim transformation director, because that's a pretty broad house. What is it within that really sets you apart, where you can hold your own, and make that really go back. It's a bit like businesses. What do big corporates do? They acquire, become broad. As soon as things get tough, what do? They do carve-outs, they do divestments, they reposition their strategy back to core, and so the cycle repeats. So if businesses are doing it, most interims trade as a business. Do the same. Yeah, because when you get focused, more importantly, if I'm a business and I'm in trouble, I don't have a generalist view. I will generally have quite an isolated view. It may not be root cause, but I will have the notion that, well, it's the operations aren't working, or it's whatever, So think about matching within what you're really, really good at amongst your peer group, and that should help. Hopefully that answers the question there.
Yeah, thank you both very much. That definitely answers my question. So Chris Wheeler has posted a question to the group. Chris, would you like to pick that up? Thank you.
Sure. I was very interested, and it's perfectly obvious when you see a picture in front of you, in that diagram about your value eroding over time of not standing in between. So I've got two questions. One, what can we put on our LinkedIn profiles or whatever that look as if they are a valid activity? I mean, I have been doing some learning and stuff like that, but I don't think anybody's interested in seeing the courses that I do on LinkedIn or anywhere else, frankly. And the other one is there an argument from that diagram that we should be reducing our rate as time goes on, or does that reduce our brand value, erode our brand value effectively? Or is it a reflection of the market, which is perhaps tighter and therefore If there are more candidates there, they have more choice, and we need to be more flexible, and we need to reduce our rates to react to things.
Wow.
So lots of questions there.
Oh,
Can I
well, to be
ask-
honest, two very good
Yeah.
questions there. So I'm more than delighted to pass that one to you, Joe.
No, well, I'll just pick up the last one about should you be bringing your day rate down, let me just answer it as briefly as I possibly can without getting too complex within it. When you're looking at selling your goods yourself, as in you're selling your own goods, your value to a business, there's a lot of perception in a day rate. In other words, if you think, as Simon was saying earlier, if you put yourself in the position of the buyer when you're looking at going out to market, whether you're going through ISPs or other channels, and you put yourself in their seat, if they're looking to buy a Porsche, as example, taking this out of the interim assignment market and creating a visual elsewhere. If you're a buyer looking to buy a Porsche, are you expecting to pay a lower cost, i.e. equivalent to an Audi or even worse, a Ford Fiesta? No, you're not.
Sorry, I'm going to interrupt there, because if we look at the market for AI, and we think now, instead of looking at ChatGPT, instead of looking at Copilot, instead of looking at the ones that the West has produced, we look at ones from the Chinese marketplace. All of a sudden, underpinning our market, or continuing with the car analogy, that our American-produced EV cars are now, double the price of a Chinese-produced car? We have to be real. I mean, we're pricing ourselves out of the market. So that's another argument I have in there, is that I agree we want to be conscious of what our value is, but we also need to understand what the market is for other interims doing a similar job out there. And if they can do it for a lower rate, should we be coming down to it?
Well, I think there's obviously a commonsensical aspect to it as well. I mean, with the interims that we've worked for, because I mentioned earlier directly sourced talent, there's a lot of toing and froing around the value or one's day rate or what salaries are being contended out there in today's market, whether it's this country or other. And I think we have to be sensible about it. We do obviously have to recognise economies, what's going on generally, and what's affecting companies' decisions on hiring and what they need and how much they're willing to pay. But again, we do go back to the perception piece. And the perception piece is, in our world, whatever dynamic, even in COVID, when we have taken interims and presented them, or they presented themselves as directly sourced talent, Simon will agree that we have never gone down on a day rate. In fact, our interim players have seen anywhere between a 23 to 25% increase in their day rate because they were directly sourced. So whilst, yes, you're right, we do have to consider economics. My view, and Simon, I'll bring you in on this, is that, it depends on how you present in market and how you, exactly that, sell your wares to companies of interest. So Simon, I don't know if you've got anything further.
Yeah, I think there's three things here. I mean, it was, I think that the first thing about day rate, and then we'll pick up on the LinkedIn narrative around the gaps. But if we think about interims going to market, for the majority of organisations that you are likely to interface with, it may be the first time that organisation is actually considering an interim appointment. Unless your client audience is a major PLC, you're typically finding with the SME market, it's like, well, we know we've got a problem, we need a short-term solution. Do we go consultancy? No, not really, because we need somebody to actually be on the ground doing stuff, not theorising it for us. And therefore, but the notion of that engagement for an awful lot of buying employers is, it could be a first time view. And so from that point of view, they are looking, if there's an ISP and is the conduit, they will be looking to the ISP to give them a sense of what is the benchmark, what is the parameter. But even if you're going direct, it's then down to your ability to position and direct negotiation skills. So what I would say, Chris, is that yes, if what you're looking to take to market, to use the US versus the Chinese piece, the real issue there is the fact that when you peddle knowledge or you peddle a solution that over time gets eroded and in market perceived as commoditized, then yes, retaining that level of day rate becomes more challenging over time. So the advice I would give to people about how to mitigate that is, yes, be mindful of what the market appetite is, but it doesn't mean that you drop your day rate without doing that consideration first, because sometimes I can tell you that it can go the other way. If you present too low, then you can actually put in the buyer's mindset a signal which is, well, on paper, he looked really impressive, but he's now telling me I can get him for this. Maybe I've misjudged him. Maybe he's not quite all that. So you've got to be very aware about the sensitivity within a particular sector marketplace. And actually, the annual survey the IIM does give some indicative clues around, day rate averages across the participant audience, across different sectors and role types. So, and equally, recruiters do a lot of surveys on this. So bear that in mind. But generally speaking, the way to bolster a day rate is really focus on your niche expertise, the bit within the broad brush that you're really good at, and elements of what you do will be perceived by the marketplace as being of higher value. So, for example, if you're an interim finance guy, nobody would do this as an interim finance guy. So I'm going to be clearly extreme in the example. But you wouldn't go to market saying great at purchase ledger and, sort of whatever you call it, nominal accounting reconciliations. Why? Because that's seen as one of your foundation skills that you would have learned 20 odd years ago. But if, however, you're really good at integrating post M&A, so even though the badge is interim finance, it's the integration piece that actually has the value if you're able to deliver that effectively. So think about the niche within your broad brush of capabilities and think about how that will be perceived in market. And then the second thing that you do on the back of that is you basically engage organizations or opportunities that put that as their most pressing need and requirement. And then you shouldn't find yourself in a disconnect between the perception of your brand and what a particular audience is prepared to pay. So hopefully that gives a useful insight there to you, Chris. Do you want me just to go on about the LinkedIn narrative, just to box the question off?
Yeah, a couple of minutes, Simon, because we have.
Yeah, okay, no, that's fine. Well. The first thing that I would say, Chris, is if you're trading as a business, Chris Wheeler Incorporated or whatever it may be, if you put that onto your LinkedIn profile as a role as employment history, and let's say that's been going for 10 years, essentially that will be, 2015 to present. So in actual fact, you've got to get out a jail card there if you trade through an entity. Now that will require you, if you've not done it already, to put that business onto LinkedIn as a company page, so you can attribute your time and experience to that environment. If you don't do that, it won't let you do it. But that's one way of doing it. And as far as your observation around, well, I've done courses, are people really interested in that? As part of the broader narrative, I think it's good in the sense that you're effectively able to say to the world, you are maintaining your knowledge currency. And for interims, particularly when you're going to get people coming into the market that are being displaced from permanent roles, who will struggle to get a permanent role, who will then want to label themselves as interim, or as Tony Evans, the chairman of the IIM, calls them politely, the in-betweeners, that you've got to really offer the advantage against those people. And the advantage is time served. You know what landing in quick, delivering quick means. So hopefully that gives you a quick clue indicator as to what you can do around LinkedIn.
Thanks, Simon. So I'd like to hand over to James Clare now, who has a question.
Thank you very much. And so first of all, Simon and Joe, thank you very much for this presentation. I think what you presented so far makes a lot of sense. It's good to see some data. I think it would be reassuring, or maybe to give us a bit of hope on the way that you have some success stories. What have you done with specific interims? How have you transformed the way they've approached that? What success do they have? How long it took? It'd be good to get some examples, I think, from what you're saying.
Go on then, Simon, you start off with that one.
Okay, all right. If you will see on our page, we're Morphosis Partners, so there is a page on our website that would be a good supporting link, which is the tab for testimonials. And if you drop down that page, it will take you to essentially 4 or 5 case studies and then a table. And the table highlights executives in their situation before they came to us. So effectively, we took a measure of that. How long did it take? What did they perceive as their opportunity of loss of income, in terms of not being on assignment? And then also on the right, obviously in blue, because that's essentially one of our corporate colours, it then highlights the impact by being a Morphosis client. But I'll just give you a couple of simple examples that are relatively recent. So I'm just trying to pick on ones that may or may not be IIM Institute members.
Mike.
I don't think that's necessarily relevant, but yeah, Mike is a good example. So, he came to us as an interim transformation director. He'd been looking for best part of 11 months off assignment, but prior to that, he had a continuum of access routes to assignments. So we refer to it as he suddenly hit a cattle grid. That's the term we give it for some reason. So he hit a cattle grid, and what did he do? He sorted out his CV, sorted out LinkedIn, was pretty much with every man and the dog in the ISP world. And so clearly that collectively, for whatever reason, wasn't working. So comes to us. We offer a range of solutions that are all tailored to suit the individual circumstance. So if you look at this wheel that's on screen now, each one of you on this call will have a different bias against this wheel. Some of you will be very adept on LinkedIn, for example, others less so, and similarly if you go around the wheel. So we assessed Mike's current situation. We did it quite quickly through an audit. And what that effectively told us is what wasn't working and why. What we could clearly see that it wasn't that he was not capable in role anymore. That's not what's being assessed. What's being assessed is how well aligned is he to the nature of the assignment acquisition game today. So he was clearly misaligned. His LinkedIn profile wasn't great. He was on it, he was using it, but not effectively. He was doing lots of likes, lots of comments, but that doesn't get you an assignment. Equally, what he found was a lot of the calls from ISPs, he was trying to fit the assignment rather than get an assignment to fit him. So a lot of those opportunities that he was called by, just for whatever reason, weren't landing. So that was the typical environment that he was in, which is not uncommon to the interims that we speak to. So he then came on board. What did we do? Well, the first thing that we do is we made him very aware that he needs to have focus within the market in order to stand out within his chosen marketplace. He lacked clarity on it. So the first thing we did is get him focused. That meant that he wasn't just an interim transformation director open to anything anywhere. We actually helped him to understand his core value proposition with particular segments in mind. So in his case, private equity was a group that he was quite keen to go to. His comments at the time were, nobody's spending the dry powder, there's very little activity in that space, which is typical of a lot of the rhetoric that some of the ISPs were giving him. Okay.
Can we just mention here that he wanted to go into the private equity world and that he had 4 processes at the end of the 11 months that basically when he started working with us, we just discarded. They weren't going anywhere. And we started working with him in November 2023, and most would presume that November coming into December is a quiet month. That's from the perception one is expected to accept that it's quiet at Christmas. We started working with him at the beginning of November. I'm just answering the timeline thing here before Simon just gives a little bit more detail. Started working with him. I met him end of October, started working with him first week in November. We got going. Within 2 weeks, we were ready. We were in market. We're doing all that Simon just described. And interestingly, by close of play for Christmas, which was mid-December, so some 4 or 5 weeks later, we had 23 live conversations in the private equity world where Mike had no connectivity at all. Interestingly, our connectivity wasn't relevant either. And from the timeline perspective, in January 2024, from a standing start of nothing in November 2023, Mike signed for an assignment in the PE world that started in July 2024, which is a little further down the curve line than we expected. So we actually fulfilled for February through to July. Interestingly, the whole caper from start to finish took 13 weeks after looking for 11 months and not getting anywhere. Back over to you, Simon.
Yeah, so his opportunity loss, not by his lack of capability on assignment, but his lack of alignment to the nuances of the job search today, cost him around £240,000 in his estimate in opportunity loss of income, which kind of pales in significance then for obviously the types of services that we provide and what we charge. But the interesting thing was his first offer was due to start in the July, but because of the approach we took, he then accrued a secondary offer that meant he was able to start and bridge that gap, you know, that he started at the end of January, early Feb. But in terms of time frame, it's an interesting question because most people believe that the job market there's not much going on. I would actually challenge that and say there's loads going on if you know where to look and how to look and you look in the right places. There is definitely fragmentation, there's definitely indecision, but companies are hiring people on a daily basis in certain segments of certain sectors. And so the real skill is about how do you make yourself visible and how do you tune into what it is that that business is looking to resolve. So just to correct slightly what Joe said about 23 meetings in PE, they were across both the PE provider themselves and also, where relevant, the appropriate portfolio business. What we didn't engage were any recruiters or ISPs. Why? Because he was with them all anyway. So for us, in his case, there was no value to add. The only thing we did add is that when he did get the call from the odd ISP, to have a process where he was selecting them in just as much as they were trying to select him in onto a shortlist. Because I think one of the issues that a lot of people suffer from is they almost feel quite flattered to get the approach, whether it be a recruiter or an ISP. And so you sort of get taken on that journey, which is, oh, they want me, they're interested in me, great, put me forward. But actually, there are some sensible questions that you need to be pushing back with the ISP. Are you retained on the role? It's a great question. Have you placed in that business before? What's your point of contact? So, based on the conversation we've had, how do you propose you're going to position me to your client? Great questions, which if you think about it, what is that then informing you? It informs you, are they the right provider and individual to back you in regards to that particular opportunity? Because certainly what I see are companies using more than one ISP at the same time. And the problem with that is that it becomes all about speed, less about consideration. And sometimes, and I'm sure you've all had them, where you get the odd call and you go, I wonder why they call me about that. I'm just nowhere near the mark for that. I wouldn't call myself about that one. But these things happen, and it's all about fueling the urgency, fueling the speed. So qualifying them in to be your representative as much as they are trying to qualify you in to their shortlist, I think is another key takeaway that I would put into the general topic of the question that you've raised.
So I hope we've answered it. I hope we've given you enough, info.
Yeah.
Have we got any more?
Yes, thank you, Joe and Simon. Yes, so Charles Smee had his hand up a while ago. Over to you, Charles.
Thank you very much, Joe and Simon. Very interesting. I just wanted to ask a question which slightly follows for what Chris Wheeler was asking. So if things are getting a bit tougher, which appears they are, and the world's more global, are you talked about permanent interim positions and agency and also consultancy. What's your understanding of fractional, which seems to be perhaps a buzzword from USA more so than Europe? What's your understanding of fractional, and how does that tie into permanent interim consultancy choice for employers?
Do you want to answer that, Joe, or are you happy for me to take it first?
Go on, you take it first. I'm just thinking about it.
No, it's fine. I mean, again, it is a good question, because there's a lot of noise about fractional at the minute, and if you read the the sort of what I would call the futurists, they are effectively projecting to a horizon probably by 2040 where the vast majority of the workforce will be indeed fractionally engaged. So if you really want to throw the fishing line out far enough, I think the world is going to be moving towards that anyway. However, here and now, fractional is just a nicer term than saying part-time. And it's another way of saying portfolio, because it's a collective of parts. Now, the advantage fractional gives clearly is that if you're an earlier stage business, for example, carrying £1,000 a day, 5 days a week, doesn't reflect perhaps the need in that business at that point, nor does it look like a sustainable financial model for the end environment. So fractional is particularly attractive for earlier stage owner managed, or earlier stage investor backed environments. So if that happens to be your sweet spot and that happens to be where you want to go professionally, then yes, I would say there's a receptive audience for it. However, do I see that within larger SMEs and the larger corporates? Absolutely not. And bearing in mind that we support clients across all sectors and most functions, and certainly some of our clients include chief people officers, from very well recognized businesses. And what they say is that, what they're looking to do with their workforce is they're generally speaking, they're looking at making the employee more fractional within their employed role. So what does that mean? Instead of saying you are a project manager and you're going to repeat for 40 hours a week exactly the same process, what some employers are starting to recognize now is that as they bring in things like automation, AI, RPA, and similar, particularly within manufacturing and more technically inclined environments. In fact, I would say business services will be following suit quite quickly as well. That there's not going to be the requirement for that one employee to give 40 hours of their time to that one task, because as things become more effective and efficient, it actually gives a business the opportunity to run an employee across maybe 1 or 2 areas of focus simultaneously. So I suspect in the larger corporates, that's the path that we'll be going down. But fractional is a hard sell for ISPs. So if you were talking about it, but when you add in the multipliers of the margins and things like that, if I'm a typical business and I believe I need somebody, let's say, I don't know, 1 day a week, maybe 1.5 days a week, the challenge that the ISPs have today isn't that there aren't the businesses that have that need. It's more to do with the fact that those businesses today don't necessarily think the provider for that is an ISP or the provider for that is the recruiter. Because the fractional clients that we work, that we've supported that go fractional, generally speaking, they're getting it through the advisory channels. They're not getting it through the ISP channels. Or at least, but again, we've not worked with everybody, but based on the small cross section that we've seen, we're finding for those who want that plural portfolio, gig, we're finding that we're getting much more success through the channels of, say, PE, corporate finance, and transaction advisory services, much more so than we are the ISP route. And of course, we don't ignore ISPs. We actively support our clients where the ISP has the mandated opportunity that makes sense for them. So hopefully, Charles, that gives you...
No, thank you, Sam. That's interesting.
Yeah.
I can think of nothing else to say. So yes. Next question.
Thank you. So now over to Greg Solomon.
Hey, hi. Thank you. Finding this very interesting. Appreciate it. I know I'm not a sort of fractional type. I do change management for banks. I've just finished an assignment yesterday. So this is a very well-timed presentation. Thank you. In the last 18 months, therefore, I've been very, very full on and have not really engaged with much of my network in that time. So my question is, how do I best prioritize my time? What I tend to do is I tend to sort of multitask on a daily basis, and I do a different combination of different things. So far, all I've really done is put myself as available for open to work on LinkedIn. I like the idea of doing a LinkedIn audit. I think that's probably a good step. Long time since I have done that. Clearly, I've got my top network, my most favoured ISPs, recruiters, who have proven themselves in the past, and luckily I can turn up those quite quickly in a list. I almost feel I should sort of organise myself with a Salesforce or whatever list so I can actually mail people efficiently, because it takes me months, literally months, to engage with all of those, all of the contacts that I've had, people who actually know me and so forth, because I've just got a long list accrued over 25 years of being an interim. Clearly, there are lots of job boards out there. I engage with them bit by bit. Tick off their list, remember to put myself back on JobServe, because it's obviously stops when you don't use those things often. There are a lot of direct jobs these days, so doing occasional Googles of direct placements by firms is clearly worth doing, but you can't do all this together. How do I best prioritize myself? What do you think the right running order of my efforts should be?
Well, I would start very quickly by saying the first thing that I would address and do address with everyone in that situation, whether they've just left assignment or indeed looking and have been looking for a while, is again, I go back to the audit of the network piece, because I would ask you a question, and the question is, how many people do you have in your network today, right now, that you are confident would be able to offer you advocacy, a nod in the right direction, a tip, a wink, or in fact put you into a role? How many do you actually have in your network who you are no threat to, who could actually be of service to you without an approximation, an actual number? Because that network audit I keep mentioning does give you that number, and it gives you sight of relevant individuals. So that would be the first point, would be audit your network to find those people who you are no threat to, not like you, not others that give the same service as you, because you would be classed as a competitor, but those above you. And I suggest that you then rationalize those above you to say, well, how many of these people do I actively know and they know me? Because that's your starting point. So that's very, very good time spent. And it also gives you a clear view of where your brand actually sits, because most of everybody's network sits beneath them. In other words, people they've had working for them, or people like them. So that would be the first port of call. The second port of call would be, what are you looking like on LinkedIn? For instance, open to work does not add. It's not searchable. It's not enabled to be found by any search criteria on LinkedIn, because there are certain forces such as Sales Navigator, Recruiter Lite, that literally can be used by companies and ISPs to find talent. So literally it's about understanding, if you're going to do any time, find out, exacerbate your LinkedIn profile to be found on LinkedIn. That's the main criteria after, for us anyway, after you have audited your network and found the key players, if any, then basically what's happening on LinkedIn? How am I positioned on LinkedIn? Am I being found? What activity have I got? Is the algorithm pushing me up? How do I compare to competitors? What am I posting? What are the dynamic posts I'm putting out there? And where am I heading? What's my next focus? What's the sector, the company, the sweet spot that I'm trying to get into? Because that's what your LinkedIn network or your LinkedIn profile, and indeed any associative sort of marketing, has to be focused on. As Simon said, it's about sharp focus. That would be my comment. Over to you, Simon.
Yeah, I think generally speaking, I would say that the first thing has to be that you are, okay, so based on what I've done, what am I aiming to do next? Is it more of the same, or is it an element of contrast? So once you've then made your mind up on that, it's then about making sure that your marketing materials, i.e. shop window, whether it be a website or LinkedIn, supports that. So that's the first thing that I would do. And then to Joe's point, absolutely, you've got to then sort of rally the troops in your existing network to be minded as to not engaging your network ad infinitum or in total, but actually, if you look at your network properly, I mean, for the average client that we support, where we focus on their existing network as part of the journey, on average, less than 5% of the network is actually forward relevant. So once you know who that forward relevant piece is, to your comment about order of play, management of time, etc., it becomes a damn sight more efficient in that regard on its own. And then I would also say, don't get distracted by herd like noise on LinkedIn, which is, oh, you've got to be commenting, you've got to be liking, you've got to be sharing. That does not help. And the other thing I would say is LinkedIn doesn't work based on this idea of teasing and coercing an algorithm. It's actually a CRM system when you break it down, because headhunters, ISPs, employers, they will often subscribe to something called Recruiter Lite or Sales Navigator, and that platform looks very different to the platform that you will see as a consumer, almost in the retail sense of it. And for me, for example, when I use it, it comes up with parameters. It's what's the title, what's the industry, what's the location. So make sure that those things are aligned to support your forward intention. And then that will mean that more of the right noise will start to come through you through LinkedIn. That then saves you time. And against that time, from a branding perspective, rather than make the wrong kind of noise on LinkedIn, this is about putting yourself in the room where your intended buyer audiences are likely to be. And that's not ISP drink events. That's events with the business owners and leaders for your segment. So if you spent a lot of time in banking, for example, there's loads of great events. There's loads of great networks where you can get the chieftains in the room. They will be present. And the idea is, therefore, frequenting that is going to give you a captive audience. And there's quite a lot of them. And, those are the channels that I would focus your networking activities on, rather than sort of getting trapped by LinkedIn, who want nothing more than for you to spend every twitching day of your job search locked into LinkedIn, because actually there's more to the assignment search than sitting on LinkedIn and getting frustrated.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm very confident my sweet spot is clear and is well advertised, and I do get traffic from LinkedIn, relevant, useful traffic from LinkedIn.
Right.
And that sort of carries on whether I'm engaged or not. I did find an immediate uptick from marking myself available to work, and had immediate, within 24 hours, I had 3 or 4 people, some of whom knew me, one of whom didn't, get in contact either about imminent roles or and so forth. So there is some traction there. I like what you say. Thank you very much about, yes, I think if I understand it right, I'm doing the right thing by spreading my time, and as you say, not just focusing on LinkedIn, but many other routes too. And I very much like your idea about banking events, for instance. That makes a lot of sense, and it's not an area I've actively gone out and looked for. So thank you for that. I will follow that up.
Right.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So I'm just conscious of time. We've gone 5 minutes, nearly 10 minutes past the hour. I don't have any more questions in the chat. So I'd just like to draw the session to a close. Is there anything, Simon and Joe, anything else you'd like to say before I close it?
No, thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure to be here, and I hope it's been insightful and valuable for those attending.
Yeah, hopefully it's been informative, and picking up on Joe's point of view, if people need assistance on how to get access to a network toward it, by all means, drop Joe a line. And indeed, if people are curious about their profiles and can it be found, would you like us to do those searches to see if you could be found what you want to be found for, then again, just drop us a note and we can organise a bit of time to see for that how you stack up with your current proposition and branding. So we're there to help. We're a partner to the IIM for a reason. We have an active interest with interims, so we're here to support you if support is warranted and relevant and needed. So, but thank you for joining us today, because I'm sure a lot of you would have rather been sat outside on a jack chair. supping on a glass of orange or similar. It's rather nice today. So thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank
Well,
you.
thank you everybody for joining, and look forward to seeing you soon. Take care. Have a nice
Thank you.
afternoon.
Take care. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Guys.
Bye. Bye.